If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume you already know a little bit about the US military's high-frequency global communication system and emergency action messages. Maybe you've read about these things from a website like Priyom.org, or you found numberstation.com's write-up from a quick online search. Alternatively, if you're coming from the YouTube audience, maybe what you know about these things comes from watching a YouTube video on the topic, one where the author is almost verbatim reading off the aforementioned resources, mixed in maybe a little bit of Wikipedia, and of course that person doesn't bother to give any credit to any of the resources they used to put that video together. However you got here, I have something to add that maybe you're not as familiar with. Since I personally started listening to these frequencies in January of 2022, I've heard over 3,000 structured messages on these frequencies, contributed over 3,000 entries into the site EAM.watch, and uploaded recordings of hundreds of these messages onto a YouTube playlist that you can listen to and browse through yourself. I've heard a lot of different messages, and I've heard quite a different formats, made a lot of observations and speculation on the format, purpose, meaning, and encryption method of these messages. And by far, I think the most interesting of these messages are the 8888 messages. It is not at all an exaggeration to say that these are the only messages that make me sit up in my chair when I hear them. And I think they're the most interesting message on the entire HFGCS. So it's a total disservice that none of the other resources I've mentioned are talking about them. But lucky for you, if you found this video, I'm going to talk about them. So to understand what it is about these messages that is so surprising, I've got to explain something to you about these messages. If you've heard more than a couple dozen or a few thousand of these messages like I have, it's probably something you notice yourself. But if you haven't, you're not going to know more about these messages except for what you've heard from the other resources. They're usually about 30 characters long. They're read out loud using the NATO phonetic alphabet, and they can be made up of any combination of letters and numbers, right? Not quite. You could listen to tens, hundreds, again, thousands of these messages, and you are going to hear any of the letters of the alphabet an untold number of times, and any of the numbers an untold number of times, except for four things. The numbers 0, 1, 8, and 9 do not appear in most messages. In fact, I would say they don't appear in 99.9% of messages. Now let's take a look at those four numbers again. 0, 1, 8, 9. The first two have a decent reason for being excluded. The number 0 could be confused for the letter O. The number 1 could be confused for the letter I. A lot of systems like this will typically either exclude 0 and 1 or O and I just to avoid ambiguity or possible errors, whether it's due to floppy handwriting or a font that doesn't render the characters with sufficient distinction, whatever it is that makes it easy to confuse the characters and numbers. But we're still going to note their exclusion here. And then, the other two numbers, 8 and 9, there's no quick and obvious reason for 8 and 9 to be excluded. I was assuming they were kind of held in regard as special characters of some kind, and as we're about to see, that's certainly going to be the case, at least with the number 8. Moving on, for a period of time, the EAM.watch Discord community actually believed that these numbers, again 0, 1, 8, and 9, they thought that those numbers had never appeared in any emergency action message. So you can imagine my shock on the afternoon of November 18th, 2022, when I was browsing a 4chan thread about emergency action messages, and somebody uploaded this recording.
All stations, this is retaliate, break, 8, 8, 8, 8, 0, 0, stand by, 8, 8, 8, 8, 0, 0, stand by.
Upon prompting, they confirmed that the message had been broadcast just a few hours earlier, that is on the same day, but nobody else really took note of that message. So I immediately followed up on this, again, to confirm the time the message went out, and upon asking, I also found out that another message like this had gone out less than half an hour later.
8, 8, 8, Stand by. 8. Stand by. Message following.
As you might imagine, when I reported on this to the EAM.watch Discord community, speculation on the messages began pretty much immediately. Some people wondered if it had to do with a missile test launch in Russia. Others wondered if it meant the US was about to launch their own missile test. As is often the case, people attempted to line the messages up with US Air Force flight data using sites like ADSB Exchange, and some people actually wondered if the messages were real at all. These were messages that were breaking the conventions of what was usually broadcast. It had a lot of duplicate characters in them. It had digits that didn't show up in messages. I was someone who at that point had been in the hobby for less than a year and was telling them about something that was really coming from 4chan. It meant for some people, the entire thing had a big asterisk next to it. I kept listening to the HFGCS frequencies because it was actually these messages that inspired me to kind of begin a full-throttled effort to monitor them as much as possible so that if another 8888 message was broadcast, I wouldn't miss it and then could tell people to tune in real time so they could hear it for themselves and not have any doubts. As it happens, I wouldn't have to listen that long. The next 8888 message would be broadcast less than a week later on November 22, 2022. But rather than the rest of this video sticking to this format, following along with these messages from my perspective and my research process, I'd actually like to turn the clock back a bit and give you guys a little bit of context. Because this channel is actively being sponsored by people through my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, I've been able to, buy some time for myself and do some research on the HFGCS. And I've been able to uncover a lot of previously documented information about these specific messages, and that is going to let me give you guys some better context and some more accurate information. So I could do this faux gonzo journalistic approach video and talk to you about how I had the wrong information for 3 months and how I dug myself out of that quagmire, and maybe that would make a more interesting video. Maybe if I spent a little more time editing the audio and so on, something compelling with a lot of views. But I'd actually kind of like to do this properly for research purposes. For anyone down the line who comes across this message because they're listening to the HFGCS themselves and they're curious about these messages, that you can use this more as a resource than an entertainment. So before I talk to you more about 2022, let's go back to 1992. Alright, so 1992. As far as that goes, what we know today as the HFGCS, the High Frequency Global Communication System, can trace its contemporary history back to 1992. Quoting directly from a document by Larry Van Horn for the Monitoring Times, on June 1st, 1992, the Global HF System, or GHFS, was created by consolidating other U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy HF networks, including the U.S. Air Force's Global Command and Communication System, the Navy's Ship-to-Shore High Command Network, and the dedicated Strategic Air Command Giant Talk System. The goal of the merger was to develop one worldwide non-dedicated HF network capable of providing command and control HF communications to support all authorized Department of Defense aircraft and ground stations. This doesn't necessarily tell us anything about these messages. 8888 messages may well have been broadcast before 1992, or maybe 1992 was the earliest broadcast date for a message. Whatever, but nonetheless, it's an important bit of context. I have done a lot of digging on the full and complete history of these communication systems, and I can trace it back to the 1960s, and in a way I may even be able to trace it back to the end of World War II, but that's for another video. If you'd be interested in hearing about that video, let me know about it in the comments, but for now, let's just move on and talk about the 90s at large. There's no exact date provided in what I'm about to tell you about, but I found a blog entry in 2007 and it talks about 8888 messages, and it says that while they were always rare, they were heard during this time period. So to quote directly from the blog, it describes 8888 messages as a very rare format mostly heard in the run-up to Y2K, and it says that they are a 30-character string beginning in 888800. Obviously, that is not a lot of information, but it does confirm that people were hearing these messages in the lead up to the millennia. I really wish the transcriptions had been shared of those messages that people heard, because as it stands, I've got a lot of questions about them in the 90s, possibly earlier. But as far as that information from looking through that blog, I found it to be very reliable. And so if they're saying the messages were broadcast as they've put it in the run-up to Y2K, I don't see any reason to doubt it. So using that as a reference, that would mean almost by definition that the absolute latest, the first of these messages would have been broadcast was sometime in 1999. There's a lot of leeway here. They may have debuted with the start of the GHFS in 1992. They may have been something that the GHFS inherited from a previous system. There's a ton of leeway here. Now, while the information that this blog entry gives me is light, what it does tell me is interesting. Moving on to the 2000s, this is a little bit of an incidental footnote, but on the 1st of October 2002, the global HF system was renamed to the HF Global Communications System, the HF-GCS. That is something you yourself may wish to keep in mind. If you finish watching this video and decide you want to do searches of the internet, the FOIA requests, Usenet forums, I don't know, to dredge up any information that I've missed. There's a dash in HFGCS at some point that was dropped, but no one's quite sure if there's any specific date on that, whether that was actually a swap over or maybe like they were always kind of alternating back and forth between HF-GCS with and without that dash. But depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish, you may want to try and do web searches both for the GHFS and the HFGCS if you're looking for documentation on messages from the 90s and 2000s. And in fact, it is exactly that kind of trial and error searching for EAM documentation that is what led me to what I think is currently the very first 8888 message that is documented and can currently be found on the internet. So, broadcast on the 23rd of February 2004, we have this message. Unfortunately, there's no recording to figure out what's going on with those question marks there. But this is a transcription from volume 10 of the Worldwide UTE News Club. Because I don't have anything else, I'm going to take that. What's curious about this message though is the length. It is 36 characters. As we just heard from that blog about messages in the 90s, they were typically 30 characters. And as we're going to see with some later quadruple eights, they're also 30 characters. So this one kind of sticks out for the extra 6 characters. It can be pretty easily explained by the AABBCC string, which is unlike anything we're going to see in any other message. But why is it there? We have no idea. So I want to emphasize, I think this is the earliest transcription of a message that can be found online of this kind. I could be wrong. Usenet, Freedom of Information Access requests, things like this, databases that can't be found through Google or Bing or any other search engine. There are a lot of blank spots in my research, so there could be stuff out there. So, you know, if you find an earlier message or you yourself were doing transcriptions, by all means, please get in touch. I would love to update this information either through a new YouTube video or just the other information channels that I have available. But at least for now, as far as I know, this message, February 23rd, 2004, has the distinction of being the very first quadruple 8 message where I actually have a transcription of it and know what it looks like. All right, so 2005, 2006, I don't have any information for you, but 2007, I have another transcription of a quadruple 8 message from a transcription shared to a blog I talked about earlier, and that blog's name is Utility Planet, which succeeded a component of Monitoring Times, which is a source I talked to earlier when I quoted it for the information on the 1992 start date of the GHFS. And it's that same resource that told me about the 2002 rename to the HFGCS. So this transcription was documented by Jeff Haverlaw, apparently on June 26, 2007, sometime after 0125 Zulu. And this is what we've got. Again, this is from that blog, so if you read the rest of the article, you'll find that they're talking about some other unusual messages that were broadcast around the same time. And what I found interesting was an aside on fearmongers who exaggerate HFGCS to get attention. It turns out that people who turn EAMs into clickbait and fear porn isn't exclusively a monitor problem. It isn't exclusive to YouTube. Who would have thought, right? Anyways, as far as the message itself goes, you're going to notice something weird here. The presence of the character I, not quite where we expect it. I would have thought maybe we would see a 1 there. We're going to come back to that later on in the video, but just keep it in the back of your mind for now. Another weird thing, the message is ending in 8886. I would imagine it actually ended in 8888. I wish I had a recording here because I feel like that is a transcription error, but just because I don't have a recording and I've got to take the transcription as is, just, leave that as another asterisk in the back of your mind whenever you're looking at that message. Okay, so after 2007, 2008, I don't have anything that I found while searching. 2009, I don't have anything I found while searching. 2010, while searching. Just to skip ahead here, after the year 2007 and the transcription that we just went through, there is over a decade where I haven't found any evidence of any quadruple 8 messages. No transcriptions, no recordings. Does that mean there were no quadruple 8 messages for that long? It's hard to say. During this period of time, I don't doubt that there were people who were monitoring these frequencies as a hobby, and I think it's entirely possible that they heard quadruple 8 messages, but there's nothing that would say they would necessarily share their transcriptions online. That is a problem even today. I've talked to a lot of people who do monitor these frequencies and they don't share their transcriptions online. Even now, when we do have like a modern database solution like the website EAM.watch, where anyone can sign up to and submit transcriptions or recordings. So I'm going to make this call out several times, but if you're watching this video and it happens to be the case that you yourself are monitoring, or maybe you know someone who's monitoring these frequencies during this 10-year gap, or even earlier, the major gap in transcriptions prior to the year 2004, if you have any information on the quadruple 8 messages, any transcriptions, any recordings, please, reach out to someone, either myself or the EAM.watch community, and you can help fill in a very conspicuous gap in the history of these messages. And later on in the video, I'll explain why it would actually be really helpful if you did so. Moving on, we get to the year 2018. I have messages for you. I have transcriptions for you. I'm even going to have recordings for you starting from this point. 2018 gives us the first publicly available transcription of a quadruple 8 message in over a decade. It's even a message that was entered into EAM.watch, which for me means that as far as monitoring the HFGCS goes, we've officially entered the modern era. As far as the quadruple 8s go, it enters the modern era with a message from Wildbuck on March 13th, 2018. What you're gonna notice is there is a little bit of a problem with his message. Apparently, only 8888 was broadcast. It was disregarded, which means that whoever did the transcription didn't get to hear the rest of the message. This isn't going to be unique. There are some messages I'm going to show you later on that also got disregarded. But before we get to those, there is actually a second message from the same year that I want to talk to you guys about. It is not entered into EAM.watch. It is something I found on a Russian shortwave forum. So broadcast just a couple months later, May 1st, 2018, by Calm Lake, we get this message. I know for some of my audience, you guys heard Russian forum and you're thinking, how reliable is this? So I went through all 38 pages of the thread, and these people were documenting and talking about the HFGCS for a period of time from January 2017 through to November of 2022. They don't provide many recordings and they don't always provide full transcriptions, but the format of messages they discuss, the nature of the traffic they talk about, seems to line up with kind of what I would expect. A little bit of overlap with 2002 information, not necessarily from my transcriptions, but from transcriptions of other resources I trust. No major differences. So even though some of you guys are going to question it coming from a Russian shortwave forum, I don't see any reason to doubt it. So Calm Lake and Wildbuck, 2 messages 2018, 1 disregarded, 1 in full, and that sets the stage for us to take a look at 2019. Which gives us another message. Broadcast from Mackinac on the afternoon of July 12th.
All stations, this is Mackinac, break. 88880. Stand by. 88880. Stand by. 88880.
Unfortunately, it was disregarded, but I'm not too concerned about that because before they disregarded it, they did read out the full message. We did have a transcription, and that was entered into EAM.watch as well. From this message to the present, as far as I'm able to tell, I think all quadruple 8 messages that have been documented online were shared to the EAM.watch database, but if there's anything that's slipped through, I'd be interested to hear about it. But we're just going to go ahead and jump to pretty much where we left off at the start of the video, which was that there were 2 888 messages broadcast November 18th, 2022. So here they are again.
Great. 8, 0, 0, stand by. 8, 0, 0, stand by. 8, 0, 0, stand by. Message following. 8, 0, 0, 1, 8, 1, 8, 3, 1, Alpha, Echo, Golf, Kilo, November, X-ray, Zulu, 8, I say again, 8, 0, 0, 1, 8, 1, 8, 3, 1, Alpha, Echo, Golf, Kilo, November, X-ray, Zulu, 8, this is retaliate out.
And before I talk about the 2023, I just want to circle the square on something. You might be wondering about something I said at the start of the video, which is if there are a couple of older entries for quadruple 8 messages entered into EAM.watch's database, why in November of 2022 did people not recognize quadruple 8 messages when they were being broadcast? And the simple answer is that EAM.watch's search engine wasn't working at the time. At some point in early 2023, they fixed the search engine and I was able to uncover those messages from Wildbuck and Mackinac. But before I get ahead of myself again, I want to mention that the November 22nd, 2002 message, which was the first message I myself heard in real time, so I recorded that, I reported it to EAM.watch, and also shared it with my YouTube audience the very same day.
8, 0, 0, stand by, message follows. 8, 0, 0, 2, 1, 6, 5, 0, Alpha, Echo, Golf, Kilo, November, X-ray, Zulu, 8, I say again, 8, 0, 0, 2, 1, 6, 5, 0, Alpha, Echo, Golf, Kilo, November, X-ray, Zulu, 8, sending it out.
So that kind of confirmed it for me, and that's kind of the, if you like, convergence point as far as information past and present. So going on from there, I've been quietly / actively just waiting for quadruple 8 messages in very much real time. And finally, we get to 2023, the current year, as of this video being recorded and uploaded. So the interesting thing is that the quadruple 8 messages have continued, but there is something curious going on right now. So the first message broadcast this year was on March 12th. It was reported by 4chan. There's no recording available. The second message this year was broadcast on June 13th. So I happened to record this message myself and take a listen to it because there's something quite interesting that happens at the end.
All stations, this is symbolic, break. 8, 0, 0. Stand by. 8, 0, 0. Stand by. Oh, I see. Discard this transition. This is symbolic. Out.
So the operator says, oh, I see. What did he see? I have no idea, man. Your guess is as good as mine. But when I heard it, something in their voice made me think that like these messages might be over, it might be done, like maybe it's a deprecated format and you realize you shouldn't have even been reading it. Not quite, because a third quadruple 8 message was broadcast a few months later, August 21st.
All stations, this is bag feed, break. 8, 0, 0. Stand by. 8. Disregard this transmission. This is bag feed. Out.
So right now, that was about a week ago, but it gives me hope that there will be more of these messages to come in the future. I mean, when I say hope, I don't really mean hope because, well, what are these messages? And I think before we get into any deeper questions about what exactly these messages are, I just want to quickly go through all the transcriptions we currently have and just point out some of the obvious hallmarks to you guys. And again, I want to spare you the thought process of how we got here, but I do want to give credit to the folks in the EAM.watch Discord community for their assistance in speculation and attempts to deduce the format of these messages. Everything I'm about to go through right now, it looks very obvious the way I've put them together, but bearing in mind, originally November 18th, we were just looking at 2 messages, and it wasn't immediately apparent what the heck these things meant. Now that I've put this data set together, it's going to go a lot smoother. Right, so first we have obviously the quadruple 8 followed by 0, 0. So it seems fair to assume the quadruple 8 is indicating for you the message format, and the 0, 0 is just, you know, some kind of spacer or filler to break the message up a little bit and make it easier to read and or read out, whatever it is. As for the next 2 characters, in all cases but one, it is a 2-digit number that corresponds to the number of the day the message was broadcast. For example, both of the November 18th, 2022 messages have 18 here. There is one exception in our data set. The June 26, 2007 message has 25 instead of 26 for June 26. Just the irregularity of that message in mind as we move on to talking about the next section. So next section of the message, these 4 characters appear to be timestamps, so hour followed by minute. For the 2004 message, the timestamp appears to correspond to the exact same time the message was broadcast. For the 2018 message, the timestamp seems to be about 20 minutes before the message was broadcast. The 2019 message, the timestamp is about 12 minutes prior to the message, going to 2022. So for the first one, it's about 7 minutes earlier. For the second message, it's about 5 minutes earlier. And then for the third one, broadcast on the 22nd, the timestamp seems to be about the exact same time as it was broadcast, which is the same thing that happened with the 2004 message. So I skipped it because it's confusing. The 2007 message, I-600 isn't exactly a time. Maybe the I corresponds to 1. Again, just that little obfuscation with characters. but we know from later quadruple 8 messages that they're perfectly fine using the number 1 in these kinds of transmissions. But just to make things easier, let's say maybe that's what it is. Great, we get a time of 1600. Problem is the message was broadcast at 0125 Zulu, so that's either 9 hours late, corresponding to 1600 the day before, or if we're assuming it's 1600 the day of, it's 15 hours too early. So it's an irregularity, and the more I look at this message with all the apparent issues with it, I want to throw it out of the data set entirely. But we have so few messages in this data set, we're just not in a position to do that right now. So if you're looking at this data set and you're trying to go through it, keep in mind that this message may have some major transcription issues. It may also be reported as being broadcast on the wrong date. Use it, but don't rely on it individually because it's hard to make conclusions of any kind from it. Anyways, moving on just to overall review of the message format. After that timestamp, we have a section of these typically repeating character couplets with a few exceptions. What this segment means, we actually might have an answer for, but hold on to that thought so we can just finish going through the rest of the message format because we're pretty much done anyways, right? As far as closing these messages off, yes, the first 2 transcriptions have some irregularities. The 2004 message has that weird AABBCC section, and the 2007 message apparently ended in a 6 instead of an 8. We can generally say these messages end in quadruple 8, just to round the message out and close it off. Okay, cool. We've gone through the history of quadruple 8 messages, and I've just taken a walkthrough of their format with you, but what are these messages? The simple answer is that we don't know. There's also nothing to suggest that calling them 8888 messages or quadruple messages, quadruple 8, octopus messages, whatever the hell you want to call them, we don't actually know what their name is. There's actually a lot of murkiness about what's being broadcast on the HFGCS. I know most places, myself included, tend to refer to every structured message being read off as an EAM. Circumstantial evidence suggests that that is probably not quite right. What do I mean by that? I'm just going to read off from financial statement from the Department of Defense. So the Strategic Automated Command and Control System is a secure nuclear command, control, and communications system that directly supports the National Command Authority communications in the command and control of strategic and non-strategic forces. The SACCS enables the NCA to disseminate higher authority command messages, force direction messages, EAMs, and automated intercontinental ballistic missile retargeting data to the U.S. Air Force's 2 legs, the ICBM and bomber fleets of the nuclear triad, for reconnaissance, tanker, USAV munitions, and special operations communities, and to other active duty Guard and Reserve DoD users worldwide. That is a lot of jargon, a lot of abbreviations, and a lot of, I don't know, just gibberish. We get a lot of things named. There's a section that talks about nuclear EMs and non-nuclear EMs if you keep reading, but I want to get to my point, which is from all that jargon, we can conclude that there are several kinds of messages broadcast over the HFGCS, which apparently can be comprised of at least the following categories: higher authority command messages, force direction messages, emergency action messages, both nuclear and non-nuclear, and automated ICBM retargeting data. Lots of questions probably from you right now, but just to stick to the topic of today's video, what we're calling the 8888 messages, which of those 4 categories may they fall into? Okay, well, right now we have 2 leads on a possible answer. Our first lead is from a post by SIGINT on the forum hfunderground.com following a post they made on November 22nd. If you're not familiar, I've plugged them before, but SIGINT has been monitoring the HFGCS. The EAMs can diverge a little bit. They're not trying for 24/7 coverage, but what their advantage is over me is that they tend to take less breaks than I do. I've taken quite a few breaks that last more than a few months at a time, and from looking through their message transcription, they do a very good job. If for some reason, maybe you're listening to a bald-headed maniac on YouTube or Rumble who's told you that either myself or the database on EAM.watch is unreliable, instead of buying their private network of news, take a look at SIGINT's documentation of traffic. They've been monitoring the communication system and shortwave radio for quite a long time is the impression I have. I'm sure if you were to reach out to them and you happen to know a little bit about this, they probably would know a lot more than I do. So if you want to take the credentialed approach to this information, follow up with SIGINT. But anyways, for this video, as far as the lead on the quadruple 8 messages, he quoted a probably anonymous source for passing the following information on to him regarding these messages. And I quote, A source informs me that the 8888 messages have long been suspected to be test messages. Apparently, this format would occasionally be transmitted on the satellite system known as ISST, and that the ICBM Super High Frequency Satellite Terminal operated from 1990 to approximately 2006. Within that time frame, the 8888 messages were only heard on satellite and not broadcast on HF. The satellite channels have since been decommissioned. Obviously, this information is going to be not quite right. We do know that 8888 messages were heard on HF radio, apparently. We have a transcription from one from 2004, 2007. Nonetheless, the rest of this sounds about right. And just to be clear for anyone kind of wondering, the satellite communication systems were definitely decommissioned, and it's probably not the case that they were brought back into activity, because as confirmed by Matt C on Twitter, decommission involved actual physical removal of communications antennas, so it would be a lot easier said than done to bring it back into action. Okay, lead number 2. This is from a video of a tour of a decommissioned Titan II missile base.
Now, embedded in that message is a string of 7 characters. You're going to look at the first 2 characters and find the envelope that has those first 2 characters on the outside, say Golf Alpha. You'll open that up, and you're going to extract a little plastic cookie. Now you're going to look at the final 5 characters in that string that I was talking about, and compare that with the 5 characters on this cookie. And if they exactly agree, this is not a drill.
Alright, so a couple points here. After listening to that explanation of the format of the messages for the Titan II missile launches, it's probably going to seem pretty obvious to people that there are similarities between the format of the Titan missile codes that the gentleman in the video is explaining and the general format of the quadruple A messages which we have on record. What that means is up to you. Is it the exact same message format? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Is it just a related similar message that the Department of Defense kind of uses or reuses or appropriates as needed? Could be that too. Don't fix what's not broken. Or, you know, if this works in this context, it'll work fine in that context. Or they're direct related, I don't know. The second point I want to make, the 2 leads aren't actually conflicting with each other. They seem to be pointing in the same direction. Both are talking about being messages that correspond to ICBMs in one way or another. So to go back to the original question, what are these messages? Seems possible that it falls into the category 4 I proposed, the automated ICBM retargeting data, but they could be higher authority command messages. It sounds like it could be, so I'm not super sure. There's quite a few questions to go through right now, right? And I want to go through 3 major ones. Question 1, how can we fill in the gaps in the 888 message data history? This is a call for help, basically. I've already gone through it in this video, but if you or anyone you know has any transcriptions, or if it's my lucky day, if you have recordings of any of these messages that is not already included in this video or are uploaded to EAM.watch, especially if you have messages prior to 2004 or in that conspicuous gap of time I talked about earlier from 2007 through to 2018, then as far as I'm concerned, that is potentially invaluable information. But if you have that, we can talk about that. Not promising anything, but I'll see what I can do. Question 2, does the data we already have on file mean anything special? What do I mean by this question? So often in the history of this project, not just my history, but even before, people have insisted that the messages that are broadcast over the HFGCS directly correspond to real-world events. We're talking about messages that potentially correspond to either test or real launches of ICBMs. Big quotation marks there, like big qualifiers there, but I've given you dates in the video, and if your theory is at all correct, you should be able to find commonalities between some or all of those dates. And just to make it very easy for you guys, I'm gonna read off the dates that we have on file right now. February 23rd, 2004, June 26, 2007, March 13th, 2018, May 1st, 2018, July 12th, 2019, November 18th, 2022, November 22nd, 2022, March 12, 2023, June 13th, 2023, August 21st, 2023. My friends, use what you need to use. Google, ADSB Exchange, Department of Defense press releases. Find the resource. I'm not too concerned about that, but put something together, make it convincing, and say this is what happened on these days. Because if you're right, and if you can do that, you are potentially going to have like really critical news on something that seems quite important. Again, that's an open challenge. I'm not going to follow up on this myself. I don't have the time. I try and focus solely on the HFGCS and the messages, the transcriptions, the recording, blah, blah, blah. That's sufficiently time consuming. That is my current scope, open to expanding that in the future. What do these messages mean that we currently have on file? Up to you guys, if you are so inclined. Third question, what comes next? Like I said, we're at a weird spot right now. The last 3 quadruple A messages, all the messages of 2023, they've been disregarded. This has happened before. Again, messages were disregarded in 2018, 2019. Obviously, more came after, but I'm quite confused. Is a disregard like a good sign? Like, does it mean that we were on the verge of an ICBM launch and a proper kickoff to World War III? And then, last second disregard, the President of the United States gets some news otherwise, or the Department of Defense, or whoever it is, disregard, forget it, don't launch the nukes. So that, the next time you hear quadruple A over the radio, you are begging to hear a disregard so that nothing happens. That's probably an oversimplification, right? Because if these messages actually were harbingers of a global thermonuclear war, we would have died several times over November of last year. So obviously the situation is not that simple.